Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're diving deep today into the world of energy and geopolitics.
Sounds exciting.
It is, it is. We're going to be focusing specifically on gas and oil
Okay.
because even though it seems like everybody is talking about renewables these days,
Yeah.
gas and oil are still these huge players in the world. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And their influence, I think, goes way beyond just like keeping the lights on, you know?
Yeah.
They really have this power to shape economies and, start conflicts
Yeah.
and even determine who's really calling the shots in global power.
It's true. They're like these unseen forces behind all these international relations.
Yeah.
We've got some really cool sources for you guys today. We're going to be talking about everything from the history of how pipelines were built
Wow.
to what happened with energy after the whole Ukraine war. We're even going to talk about some pretty crazy stories
Oh.
of sabotage on the high seas
What?
and gas deals that actually started wars.
Oh my
It's
God.
going to be a wild ride today,
I'm ready.
so buckle up.
Right.
One thing that might surprise you is how far back this whole story with natural gas actually goes.
Oh, really?
Did you know that thousands of years ago, the Chinese were using bamboo pipes?
Bamboo pipes.
Yeah, to store gas.
Wow. I had no idea.
I know. It's crazy. And then if you fast forward to the 20th century,
Okay.
we see these massive pipeline networks popping up all over the continents.
Yeah.
They basically become like the arteries of global energy, right?
Wow.
Connecting those who are producing it to those who are consuming it.
It makes sense.
But then they also become these like flashpoints for conflict and power struggles.
Right. Because everybody wants it.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Speaking of pipelines and power struggles, let's talk about the Trans-Siberian pipeline. Have you heard of that
I
one?
have heard of that one, yeah.
So this was built in the 1980s, and it was basically pumping Russian gas straight into the heart of Europe.
Wow.
And this created a dependency on Russian gas that would have huge consequences later on.
Ugh.
Yeah. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed, things got even more messy.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
Because Ukraine, this newly independent nation,
Yeah.
found itself right smack in the middle of this super important energy route.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly, whoever controlled the flow of gas had all the power.
So Ukraine had like a lot of power then.
Yeah. So it became this big bargaining chip in this high-stakes game.
Wow. That's crazy.
I know. So it kind of sounds like a recipe for tension, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure.
Were there actual disputes over the gas going through Ukraine?
Oh, yeah. There were definitely disputes. They argued over payments for the gas, and there were even accusations that Ukraine was taking some of the gas that was meant for other European countries.
Oh, wow. They were siphoning it off.
Yeah, it was a constant source of tension between them.
I bet. And Russia wasn't just going to sit back and let that happen.
Yeah, they weren't. They responded pretty strategically, I'd say.
Oh, strategically, how so?
Well, they started finding ways to get around having to rely on Ukraine for their gas exports. They started building pipelines like Nord Stream and Turkish Stream.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah, and these completely bypassed Ukraine, so they were able to just send the gas straight to European markets.
Wow, so that really shifted the balance of power.
Yeah, it really did.
It's fascinating how these pipelines can have such huge geopolitical implications.
It is, isn't it?
And speaking of Nord Stream, that name rings a bell, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't there something that happened with that pipeline a while back?
Yeah, in 2022, Nord Stream was sabotaged. It was a really mysterious incident that shook up the global energy market.
Sabotaged? Like how?
Well, there are these underwater explosions that severely damaged the pipeline.
Wow.
And it just cut off the flow of gas completely.
Yeah.
It really raised concerns about just how vulnerable these energy infrastructures really are.
That's scary. I mean, it makes you wonder who was behind it, right?
It does, doesn't it?
Was it Russia? Or maybe another major player trying to weaken them?
Well, nobody really knows for sure. Both Russia and the U.S. have said it wasn't them, and there are just a ton of theories and accusations flying around.
It's like a real-life energy thriller.
Yeah, it is.
But beyond just the mystery of it all, what actually happened because of the Nord Stream sabotage? Did it impact the energy markets?
Oh, absolutely. Energy prices shot up almost immediately, and everybody started freaking out about energy security.
Wow.
You know, it was a real wake-up call showing us that energy can actually be used as a weapon in conflicts.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got the war in Ukraine just completely changing the game.
Oh, yeah.
Sanctions against Russia, Europe scrambling to find other places to get their gas from, the U.S. stepping in with their LNG exports.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to keep track of. But you know what's really interesting? The U.S. shale gas revolution and the
Uh,
rise of LNG have completely changed everything.
yeah, how so?
Well, think about it. Just a few years ago, the U.S. was a huge importer of natural gas. But now they're a major exporter. They're competing directly with Russia on the global stage.
Wow, so they went from being a customer to a competitor.
Exactly.
So did that shift play a role in all the tension surrounding Nord Stream?
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. definitely had a reason to want to stop pipelines like Nord Stream
Yeah.
because it was all about protecting their own economic interests and limiting how much influence Russia had in Europe.
So it's like this high-stakes chess game with all these countries making their moves on this global energy chessboard.
That's a great way to put it.
But all this geopolitical back and forth must have real consequences for everyday people, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can get caught up in all the big picture stuff, but it all comes down to how it affects people's lives.
Right.
Like in Europe, for example, the consequences of the Ukraine war and the energy crisis have been really tough on people.
Yeah, I mean, energy prices have skyrocketed over there.
Exactly. And there's a real risk of a recession because of the reduced gas supply.
It just shows you how closely connected energy and geopolitics really are.
They're completely intertwined. And it's not just happening in Europe. This whole story of gas impacting global affairs is happening everywhere. We're seeing potential flashpoints popping up in places like the Eastern Mediterranean and the Arctic. The competition for gas is just heating up.
Okay, let's dive into those regions. What's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean? Who are the main players there?
Well, they've discovered these huge gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Oh, wow.
And that's triggered a whole mess of competing interests.
Oh, no.
You've got Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, and Israel all wanting a piece of the pie. And their maritime boundaries are super contested.
So it's not just about who gets to drill for the gas. It's about territory and power.
Exactly. Each country sees these gas reserves as crucial for their energy security and their economy.
Makes sense.
And they're willing to fight for it. And then you add in all the historical baggage between these countries, the Cyprus dispute, the tensions between Greece and Turkey, the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's a really volatile situation.
Yeah, it sounds like it could explode at any moment.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears to the Arctic. You mentioned that the competition for gas resources is also heating up there. What's happening as the ice melts and opens up new opportunities?
Well, as the Arctic ice melts, all these untapped resources, including oil and gas, are becoming accessible.
I see.
So you've got countries like Russia, Canada, Norway, the US, and even Denmark through Greenland, all with overlapping claims to parts of the Arctic seabed where these resources are.
So they're all trying to stake their claim in this melting landscape? It sounds like another potential conflict zone.
It is. There's a real possibility of disputes over boundaries, exploration rights, and environmental regulations. And with climate change speeding up the melting, things are just getting more intense.
It's like a race against time to grab as much as they can before it's all gone.
Right. And then you add in the involvement of big players like Russia and the US, and it gets even more complicated.
Oh, how so?
Well, they're not just interested in the energy. They also want to project power and influence in the region.
Right.
They see the Arctic as strategically important for both its energy potential and its military positioning.
So the Arctic is kind of a microcosm of the bigger geopolitical dynamics happening in the world. Competition for resources, climate change pressures, shifting power balances. It's fascinating and a little bit scary all at the same time.
Absolutely. And as we move further into the 21st century, these dynamics are only going to become more important, especially with Asia's growing energy demand.
Right. We haven't even talked about China and India yet. They're huge players on the world stage, and their energy needs are just going to keep growing. So where do they fit into all of this?
Well, both China and India are heavily reliant on fossil fuels, including gas, to power their economies.
Yeah.
And they're constantly looking for ways to diversify their energy sources and make sure they have reliable supplies.
It sounds like this whole energy puzzle is getting really complex. It seems like every corner of the world is tangled up in this web of energy interests and geopolitics.
It really is.
So, with all that in mind, what's the future of gas in this increasingly multipolar world?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to answer it, we need to consider so many things, like advancements in technology, the transition to cleaner energy, the changing geopolitical landscape, and even the ethical questions around getting these resources.
Yeah, it's complicated, so much to think about. But I think it's clear that gas is much more than just a fuel. It's this powerful force shaping the geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. But where do we go from here? What's next for gas in a world that's grappling with climate change, energy security, and a shifting balance of global power?
That's exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. We're going to look at the future of gas, what role it might play in the global energy mix, the potential for innovation, and the geopolitical challenges that are still ahead.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, everyone. This is going to be a fascinating exploration.
It is. So we were talking about China and India becoming these big players in the gas market. Their demand for energy is massive, and it's really shaking things up.
Yeah, they're definitely changing the game. But we're also supposed to be moving away from fossil fuels, right? How does that work with everything else going on?
It's tricky. On the one hand, you've got these growing economies that really need gas to keep growing.
Yeah,
But then on the other hand, we have to deal with climate change and find cleaner energy.
it's like a balancing act. So is gas going to be like a bridge fuel while we switch over, or will it just become useless as we move towards renewables?
It's not that simple. Some people think natural gas will be important as a bridge fuel because it's cleaner than coal and oil,
Mhm.
especially in places where renewables aren't really a big thing yet.
Right.
But others say that if we spend a lot of money on gas infrastructure now, we'll be stuck with it, even when we have better options.
So no easy answers there. It seems like the future of gas depends on a lot of things like technology, politics, and even what people think.
Exactly. And speaking of technology, there are some really interesting developments that could change everything.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, there's carbon capture and storage, for example. It could really reduce the environmental impact of using gas.
How does that work?
Basically, you capture the carbon dioxide that's released when you burn gas, and then you store it underground so it doesn't pollute the air.
That sounds pretty amazing. But can we actually do that on a large scale?
It's still early days, and there are some challenges. It's expensive, and the technology isn't perfect yet.
Okay.
But if we can figure it out, it could be a total game changer for the gas industry. It could make it much cleaner and more sustainable.
So there's a lot of potential there. Are there any other cool innovations that could change things?
Yeah, definitely. Hydrogen is another big one.
Oh, right, hydrogen.
Green hydrogen, which is made using renewable energy, is a really promising clean fuel for the future. And guess what? We might be able to use the gas infrastructure we already have to transport and distribute hydrogen.
Really? So the gas pipelines we have now could be used for hydrogen later.
Exactly. It's not just about the fuel, it's about how we get it to people. And using what we already have could give hydrogen a real advantage.
That's pretty cool. So it seems like gas could adapt and evolve as the energy landscape changes. But we can't forget about all the geopolitics involved, right?
Yeah.
All this is happening with all that competition and tension in the background.
You're absolutely right. All those geopolitical factors we talked about, the competition for resources, the importance of energy for strategy, the new global players, they all matter, no matter how much technology advances.
So even if we have clean energy, those geopolitical challenges aren't going away. It seems like energy will always be a reason for countries to work together and fight with each other.
Yeah, I think so. Energy security will always be a top priority for countries. Whoever controls energy resources, whether it's gas, oil, or even renewables, will have a lot of power.
So what does this all mean for gas in the future? Will it decline as we use more renewables, or will it find a new place in a changing world?
It's hard to say for sure. I don't think gas is going to completely disappear anytime soon.
Okay.
But its role will probably change, and its importance might go up or down depending on what's happening in different regions, new technologies, and how geopolitics play out.
So the future of gas is still a bit of a mystery. But as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's important to step back and think about the big picture. What are the main things we've learned about gas and geopolitics? What should our listeners be thinking about as they try to understand this complex and constantly changing world?
I think the biggest takeaway is that energy is about so much more than just keeping our homes warm and our cars running.
Yeah.
It's about power, influence, and how everything in the world is connected. If you want to understand global events and make informed decisions, you have to understand the geopolitics of energy.
So it's not just about supply and demand. We need to think about the political and strategic reasons behind every pipeline, every energy deal, and every new technology.
Exactly. Energy is a way to understand how countries interact, how power works in the world, and the challenges and opportunities we face in the 21st century.
It's been a wild ride exploring this world of gas and geopolitics. But we're not done yet, are we?
Not quite.
We still need to talk about what all of this means for everyday people. How can we understand this complex landscape and make good choices in our own lives?
That's a great point, and it's exactly what we'll talk about in the last part of our deep dive. We'll explore how gas and geopolitics affect our daily lives, from the gas prices we see to the stability of the global economy.
Okay.
And we'll talk about how we can all be more informed and involved citizens in a world where energy is at the heart of so many important issues.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Stay tuned, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll bring it all together and see how global energy dynamics connect to the choices we make in our own lives. It's going to be an eye-opening conversation. Okay, so we've talked about all these pipelines and power struggles and, new technologies and how the world is changing. But how does all this stuff about gas and geopolitics actually affect you, the listener?
Yeah, that's the important question, right? It's easy to feel like all this global stuff is happening somewhere else, but it actually touches our lives in so many ways.
In what ways?
Well, think about how much you pay for gas or to heat your house. Those prices are directly tied to the global gas market, which, as we've been talking about, is really influenced by what's happening in the world politically.
Right, so even just filling up my gas tank is connected to these big energy politics and power struggles going on between countries.
Exactly. And it's not just about prices either. The whole global economy, whether people have jobs, even the food we eat, it's all connected to how energy, especially gas, flows around the world.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. It's kind of overwhelming when you realize how connected everything is. But with all these competing interests and potential conflicts, what can we as individuals actually do? Does our voice even matter in this big energy game?
Your voice definitely matters, maybe more than you think. For one thing, we can be smarter consumers.
Okay.
Do you know where your energy comes from? Do you know what the geopolitical effects of your energy choices are? When we understand where our energy comes from and what impact it has, we can start making better choices.
So it's about knowing what's going on in the world, learning about the energy situation, and then making informed choices about the energy we use.
Right. But it's more than just our individual choices. We can also speak up and advocate for policies that support energy efficiency, help develop renewable energy, and make sure the transition to cleaner energy is fair for everyone.
So writing to politicians, supporting organizations that are working on these issues, using our rights to push for change.
Exactly. And don't forget about the power of community action, supporting local initiatives, talking to your friends and family about these things. These little things can add up and make a big difference in how people think and act.
So it's not just about me making good choices or trying to change policies. It's about getting everyone on board and making sure we all understand how important energy is and how it affects our world.
Exactly. And don't forget, the future of energy isn't set in stone. We're all shaping it through the choices we make, the actions we take, and what we choose to speak up about.
That's really powerful. So to wrap up our exploration of gas and geopolitics, I want to leave our listeners with this. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The future of energy is in our hands. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the exciting and complex world of gas and geopolitics.